Hello, everyone. Greetings and welcome. Please drop me a note in the chat. Make sure you can hear me. My name is Deanna Sophia. I use they, them pronouns. And tonight I'm leading my fourth of a four-part series for Mental Health Awareness Month on how mindfulness supports trauma recovery. It is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart as a trauma survivor and thus someone who has been recovering from that. And this project has been, this practice has been just enormously beneficial for me, actually getting my feet back under me. And not just a way of survival, but coaching myself more into the realm of how do I thrive after that. So again, I am training to be a certified mindfulness meditation teacher. I'm undergoing a 2-year certification that's accredited by UC Berkeley. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight, it is based in 2,600-year-old Buddhist philosophy. It's also based in the last 25 or so years of modern neuroscience. And I have to be really honest that the neuroscience part of it really helped me understand how things worked in order to understand how my body worked, in order to be able to work with my body and regain agency with it. Can hear in Virginia. Hello, Virginia. Thank you for stopping in. All right, let me pull up my notes here. And also, just as a slight side note, my little cat is probably going to join us on the lap right now. She's having some pretty intense major health problems, so hopefully she won't hopefully she won't stand up in the middle of the camera. Luckily it's not tall enough for her to put her butt up in it, but she's probably going to be here, so you're probably going to hear some mews, and she is definitely needing a lot of support from me lately. So we're going to go ahead and get into this talk and talk about what exactly is trauma-sensitive mindfulness and how does it differ from regular mindfulness. My definition, we're going to talk about where I get this information from. I'm going to show you some really incredible resources. But my definition of trauma-sensitive mindfulness is a style of Vipassana meditation, which is also known as insight meditation, that centers a practice of awareness to the variations that are required to support practitioners that have a history, experience, or relationship with trauma. So, in simpler terms, it's a way of doing harm reductive mindfulness. We're aiming to reduce re-traumatization. And in my definitions of trauma, I'm very much including systemic oppression. I'm including disability. I'm including mental and physical illnesses and chronic conditions. I'm including addiction. And there are a lot of things that can be included in this umbrella of trauma that we will talk about a little bit later in the talk tonight. And I'll also say that I really prefer using the term trauma sensitive rather than trauma informed. You've probably heard the term trauma informed around different wellness communities. There are a lot of folks out there teaching trauma informed yoga. The word informed for me doesn't quite resonate. I know, little cat. Because I don't want to assume that I know what someone else's trauma is or feels like or sounds like. Like, that's not a label that I want to assume of anybody else. And I also choose to acknowledge that there is risk of re-traumatization associated with meditation practice. And I choose to encourage the folks that study and practice with me to acknowledge this for themselves as well, particularly if they have a history with it. It's good information for everybody, even if you're just in the room with other people who have tougher experiences. It is all valid. And these are ways that we can learn from each other, and that actually helps to bring about understanding and awareness of the systemic conditions that create these things, so that we have a better idea of how to hold that and nurture that and address that in our communities. And so I choose to, encourage people to understand this about themselves, because they're also the captains of their own ships. They are very much in charge of their bodies. Only they can say when a practice is or isn't within their window of support. And to me, that is a practice of informed consent, like in practice. That is exactly what informed consent is. And it really establishes the groundwork to practice in a trauma sensitive way. This establishes body autonomy for the practitioner, which is something extremely important in trauma recovery. And it also establishes the acknowledgement that myself, as the coach, that I am just here for support. I am not here to force. I am not here to fix it. I am definitely not here to be anybody's guru. That's not the kind of mindfulness and meditation that I practice. I'm not here to be anybody's leader or influence them. Influence to me is not informed consent. I don't practice influence or mindfulness. I do practice encouraging people to rein in their own power to their own life. It really does mean a lot more and resonates more and becomes an embodied practice when you work with it that way. And it's also kind of why I prefer to talk about myself as coach rather than teacher. I'm here to encourage you. You are playing your own plays on the field. I'm here to help you figure out the strategies. I'm here to help you figure out what questions to ask yourself and encourage you to do the hard things when you want and need the emotional support. So that goes along with that informed consent, because we all very much need emotional support time to time. Even us very stubborn, independent, firstborn children, Gen X folks, need the emotional support from time to time. And so, the training that I've been receiving has been trauma sensitive from the get-go. I can confirm this because they are very highly educated, respected professionals, and they built it that way on purpose. And also I can confirm that because, again, I myself am a trauma survivor. And I'm also a person who lives with chronic mental and physical illnesses and conditions, both genetically and as a result of the trauma. So we're not here to discuss the causes and conditions. We're here to find support of how to handle that, how to cope with that, how to find our own resilience for our own self. And to be quite honest, it did take me a little bit of time to find a practice that was right for me. I knew that meditation could help me, and it took me some time to find the folks that really clicked with it because they had a science and psychology backing that really understood trauma. So it took me time to really feel in my body once I started practicing that, how it was beneficial to me. So it really took me time to embody trauma sensitive mindfulness as a tool, as a technique, as a cultivated skill to really support myself. And again, I really chose to dig into the science part of it because it really helped me understand how my body was reacting, how my nervous system was reacting, what it was doing to cope, and why I was getting in my own way, as it were. And there's a big point that I want to make here with this, and that I really want to substitute, for the purpose of our conversation tonight, instead of using the word trauma, you're going to hear me use the term nervous system dysregulation. So this is a way for us to broaden the umbrella and broaden the term of trauma to incorporate all of the many ways that the nervous system of the body can go into ongoing dysregulation. So ongoing discord with itself. And so, I was working on my healing for quite some time. And once I really understood the physiological responses that my body was having, and sometimes still does have, I was able to interrupt those patterns faster in order to have more of myself at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day. I learned how to better interrupt those the grief, the freeze, the fight, and the fawn reactions that were still going on as a residual result of the lengthy and ongoing trauma experience. So it just kept on going because I didn't have the resources to get them to stop. And so I further want to elucidate why it's important to understand this and then embody it for yourself. We can talk about it all day. This is an embodied practice where you do it with your own body. Because again, it's ongoing nervous system dysregulation, which, for a simpler term, is re-traumatization. So that physiological response is a response that distorts the body's experience of the present moment. So it can zap us right back to the time that the thing happened. It's kind of like a time warp like that. It can zap us right back and speed things up. We can talk more about that too. So feeling this stuff and how it works with your own body, like how I worked with it with my own body, I started to recognize that I was beginning to actively re-engage my body in a skillful, supportive, and regenerative way that helped me regain agency with my body and thus with my mind. And this worked because I was doing the work with the actual mindfulness practice to re-engage my cognitive and emotional reasoning part of my brain that had been disconnected in the ongoing dysregulation. It's kind of a lot of science words. Don't worry, I'm going to use some really cute analogies that really will punch it on forward here in a moment. But before I get more into how this works, how the trauma-sensitive practice supports trauma recovery, disability, mental and physical illness, I want to talk a little bit more first about definitions and more about what is exactly included in that dysregulation. There is a book that I have so wonderfully been included with my training, and it is, let me make sure it's not shiny. Okay, it's kind of shiny, so it's very hard to see. It is Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness by a wonderful person named David Trelevin. And David is a psychotherapist with a background in supporting recovery for sex offenders. And he teaches mindfulness programming himself, and so of course a PhD, and also has a very wonderful podcast. And I'm going to link him in the notes on the talk afterwards too. He's also a collaborator at Cheetah House, which is a company that offers support to those who have been re-traumatized by meditation practices. In going down this path of meditation teaching, I've had a lot of people speak to me about that and how they've gotten turned off to meditation and mindfulness. And I completely acknowledge that and understand that. And I have regret and sorrow that they weren't able to have people who understood trauma and how to support that. So there are people out there that are doing the work, and it's very new and revolutionary to talk about it and to provide resources that are going to be regenerative, because you do need particular variations in order to handle a nervous system that has got those kinds of experiences going on. But his work has been just completely significant to me in building my programming, because it's really necessary information for today's world. Like, we're, with mindfulness, actively engaging the nervous system. And it is just the utmost importance that we do this safely and as supportively as possible. So I want to first put in the definition from David himself, from his book, because it's important to get the experts into this talk, which comes from the U.S. National Center for Trauma-Informed Care. And the definition is a program, organization, or system that is trauma-informed, realizes the widespread impact of trauma, and understands potential pathways for recovery. It recognizes the signs, symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staff, and others involved with the system. And it responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices, and seeks to actively resist re traumatization. And I further want to quote that trauma is less about the content of an event and more about the impact, sudden and then ongoing, that it has on our physiology. As veteran trauma specialist Pat Ogden wrote, any experience that is stressful enough to leave us feeling helpless, frightened, overwhelmed, or profoundly unsafe is considered trauma. From witnessing or experiencing violence to losing a loved one to being targeted by oppression, people can experience trauma in a variety of ways. And addressing different forms of personal trauma doesn't minimize the importance of someone else's more severe injury. That in fact, it can open a conversation about the social conditions that so often perpetuate trauma in the first place. That's really insightful. It's less about the content of what actually happened and more about the impact that it has on the body, which I will also add the community body and the earth body. So it's not just about directly experiencing violence or witnessing it. It's also about experiencing constant systemic oppression or surviving a pandemic on your own. It's discrimination, bias, ableism, living in a non-culturally dominant body every day. It's also about mental illness and even neurological differences, which we can place within the impression of an ableist society. It's also about chronic physical illness and addiction and severe anxiety and depression. I include all these definitions as potential sensitivities in my mindfulness coaching because that's where we're at. We live on a planet that is unfortunately very widespread with dysregulated nervous systems. And I know that I can't solve all those things. I can't fix all those things for everyone. I can't solely fix the system. And I can be someone who helps facilitate ways and hold space for coping to occur. Because coping is healing. Community coping is community resilience. Meditating in practice with others is community resilience, community coping, community healing. This is actually known as co-regulation. So nervous systems regulating healthily, skillfully, regeneratively with each other. It is the exact opposite of trauma bonding. And as a trauma-sensitive facilitator, I can show up with my own body, with my successful and active ongoing recovery and resilience, with my own pathways that I've built to come home to myself, with my own pathways that I've built to help me cope with my chronic conditions and illnesses, and offer that as a raw, authentic, grounded presence and space for others to do the same with their nervous systems, with their own causes and conditions. Because again, it's not about the content, it's about the impact. It's physiological, it's physical and psychological. Trauma happens in the body and it heals in the body. Trauma happens in community and it heals in the community. I want to talk next about how mindfulness meditation supports trauma recovery and also offer a sort of side-by-side of why it's important to always practice in a trauma-sensitive way, especially if that is your experience. Mindfulness meditation is the practice of cultivating non-judgmental and caring awareness of the here and now, being aware of the present moment. This is an incredibly beneficial tool for trauma recovery, to be able to access the here and now, or for recovery from addiction or from grief, or in just having a tool to cope at any point in the day when you're someone who's just trying to survive daily in a body that's not of the dominant culture. So if trauma takes us away from the present moment, away from the body, then being able to come back home to your body in order to tend to its absolute basic needs: safety, food, shelter, clean water, love, connection, joy. It's important. It's a lifeline. And mindfulness is a compassion practice. It's a self love in action practice. And because trauma, chronic illness, disability, and all the many ways that a nervous system can be dysregulated can zap you away from the present moment, can zap you right into the past, into a freeze moment, a shutdown moment, or it can zap you into a flight or a fight moment. The heart rate increases, the world speeds up to try to save yourself. It zaps you away from being with your own feet and your own grounding. So, in those times, asking yourself to be with your body cannot work in all situations. It's not always right to practice in the moment of experiencing, at least not starting a practice in the moment of experiencing. And that's why I always encourage folks who are practicing with me and studying with me, if they're willing to share what their experience is, so that I have a better understanding about how to assist. If they have any level of understanding about how stress shows up in their body, because their bodies have different needs and different communication methods with them, different nervous system responses that are going to be needed depending on what's going on. So before I start a trauma-sensitive mindfulness practice, I recommend that folks do some self-inquiry for a base level understanding of three things. One, what is the body's response to stress? Naming how it shows up. This can be general stress. There is such thing as healthy stress. There's such thing as harmful stress. So how does that actually show up? Two, if they can recognize that their own body experiences traumatic stress or nervous system dysregulation, being hard to catch up with yourself. That is a label that each practitioner decides for themselves. I am not here to label anyone's trauma. I am also very much not here to treat anyone's trauma. I want to make sure that I am very clear about that. And then number three, really check in with consent with themselves. If they are able and willing to make an agreement with themselves that they're ready to actively work with their body to cultivate recovery, or at the very least, an intention to increase access to ease and stability, an intention to cope, an intention to befriend and tend to the body, an intention to increase resilience. Without denying the causes and conditions, it's not an either or. Trauma-sensitive mindfulness does not excuse harm. What it does is it transforms the body and thus the mind's relationship to harm in order to not be bound by it. So let's talk a little more about the science of it. I love science, and I think science is very important. We're going to talk about the how along with the why trauma-sensitive, how it works. So mindfulness meditation is practicing placing a pause between stimuli and response. That is the pause where we are directly able to access in the present moment and create new neural pathways and back those pathways up. To respond in that pause moment in a skillful way that supports care and safety. This is a process called neuroplasticity. We talked about it in the last session. And this is the brain's innate ability to adapt to changing circumstances. All brains can do it. Even senior brains can do it. And this is not just thinking new thoughts instead of the old thoughts. Because again, we're not excusing, we're not bypassing, we're not shortcutting, there is no workaround. It doesn't mean that the old pathways don't exist. It doesn't mean they suddenly go away. It just means that the brain can produce and cultivate and back up new ones in addition to. So when this is practiced in a guided, supportive, regenerative way, within our window of tolerance, which is a term that I use often with teaching and coaching, and I'm going to define that momentarily. Mindfulness meditation increases the brain's access to choosing the new pathways. It increases agency of choice. It's a practice that grows over time. So I want you to think for a moment of trauma and acute stress, nervous system dysregulation, as a well-blazed trail that leads to, we'll say, Mordor, for all my Lord of the Rings nerds out there. Mindfulness meditation helps us blaze a new trail to, say, the Emerald City. So it takes time to pat down that trail through the poppies. If you pass the trail once, overgrowth is going to return. There's going to be brambles. You're going to trip on things. It's going to regrow. You're going to have to pat it down again. When we do that over time, our feet lay down that path and the trail gets better blazed. You can see more clearly where the trail is. So mindfulness for nervous system dysregulation, for acute stress, for coping with illness, for addiction recovery, is repeatedly and consciously choosing the path to Emerald City, the path to get you home. Mindfulness meditation is where cognitive behavioral therapy comes from. So I want to pause again and redefine window of tolerance. It's a very important term, and it is really the most important part of our takeaway from this discussion about trauma-sensitive mindfulness. And why I believe that survivor-led healing is the future of healing. I am an absolute proponent of informed consent and talking about trauma within the context of a mindfulness practice. The window of tolerance, again, is a coined term coined by Dr. Dan Siegel, who is a clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCLA School of Medicine and is the founding co-director of the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA. And this is the space, the window of tolerance, is the space between hypoarousal, so the shutdown response, and hyperarousal, the speed up, get the heck out response. And that's the space that provides the supportive means to practice bringing awareness to experiences, emotions, thoughts that you're ready to transform and integrate and heal. This is the part where it's helpful to note that it is important for the meditation practitioner to be aware that the person that we're practicing with might have neurological responses that push them out of the window of tolerance. There's no shame about that. It happens to the best of us. It's important for the teacher and the coach to be informed as well, which is why I am the poster child, self-proclaimed, of trauma-sensitive mindfulness, of all mindfulness, everywhere. And it's why I think that survivor-led healing is the future of healing, because more of us that have been through it need to be leading these spaces, because we've been through it. So recovery does actively re-engage and reintegrate the body and the mind by being able to reconnect, repair, as in like a speaker to a Bluetooth device. Repair, rematch the body and the mind. Being able to bit by bit process traumatic responses or dysregulated nervous system responses. With a trauma therapist, firstly, it's important to do the brain part of it, because of course it's important to understand it and unpack it. And then with support of a trauma-sensitive mindfulness guide, that helps you practice building your own tools of self-resilience for all of the times that you don't have a therapist and a guide or your emotional support pet in your lap. It's not always accessible. But having a tool that you can go to work with your body in those moments absolutely contributes to your own resilience. Because again, recovery is not just what we do thinking about it. It's what we do with our body, how the body heals itself. It's all of the day by day in between time. It's the regenerative practices that the body does to support itself in all of those in between times. That's the part that mindfulness supports. And I realize that we're going long tonight. We're probably going to go maybe another 10 minutes at max. I love talking about this stuff and I think it's really important. The mindfulness meditation is very much like a dial. We tune in daily recalibration of our balance of what the body and what the mind needs. So that's why I talked about mindfulness of the foundations of mindfulness for all of these talks for Mental Health Awareness Month. And it's how I approach my coaching. There's the first foundation of mindfulness, which is mindfulness in the body. So what is happening in the body today? Is it tired? Is it tired of processing? Does it need to rest? Does it need rejuvenation of spirit? Is it too locked down? Is it armored? Is it stuck? What movement can we then place there for regeneration and accessibility? Help us figure out how to physically process out the saturation of chemicals that are going on. And there's the second foundation of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of emotions. So is the body living in a soup of emotions today? Where are those emotions felt? Where's the pain? Where's the numbness? What regenerative practice can you apply there to ease and nurture that? What self-love can you do to nurture yourself, to literally tell yourself that you've got your back, that you're gonna care for yourself, that you're there, you're not leaving yourself alone. And there's the third foundation of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of thoughts. So are you lost in the mind today? Happens every day. We want to get back into the body when the mind is too much. What regenerative activities would help allow a presence with the thoughts in order to know that they're going to shift on? They're going to shift on. Thoughts always shift. There are clouds in the sky that shift. What can you do to stop sitting on those harmful thoughts? How do you get back into the body? Do things that it appreciates. And then there is the fourth foundation of mindfulness, which we haven't talked about in these talks, but I am going to touch on right now. That is mindfulness of the Dharma. So that's the practices themselves. And this is where I'll say that my coaching brings in additional meditative practice. It's not just awareness. It's also practices about compassion, about loving kindness, about cultivating joy, cultivating equanimity. Equanimity supports loving kindness. It supports compassion, it supports joy. I teach about impermanence. There is a particular practice that I do include in my introductory course. And it is the specific practice that led me to my teacher, that led me to this type of meditation. And it's a practice called RAIN. And it helps us handle shame and blame. It helps us U-turn back into nurturing. The RAIN is an acronym that stands for recognize, allow, investigate, nurture. Helps us be with ourselves. Helps us get out of our shame spirals. Because mindfulness meditation is that one bird, two supportive wings. You have awareness, you have compassion. It's not just the presence, it's also the caring to attend to it. And as a trauma sensitive practitioner, such as what I coach, it I include resources for folks to center the variations to practice to help them cope with their challenges and their causes and their conditions. Ways to be with the body and its specific needs that are particular to each individual. And those resources are more sturdy anchors. I think I mentioned in the first talk that we did for this month that when I started practicing meditation, my body and my breath was not safe for me to practice in. I needed an anchor that was outside of me first. So I connected with the sounds of the room. I also connected with a candle and incense because both of those things are very powerful tools to be able to connect with the present moment that have nothing to do with my body at the time. Candle is alive, it's burning there. And engaging high quality incense engages that sense of smell. It's a powerful tool for me to be able to anchor myself to the present moment. And there are other variations that can be sturdy anchors, such as not closing your eyes all the way. If closing your eyes is scary, you don't have to. Such as finding a meditative position that is with your back against a wall. If you don't want to be out in the open, you can be more supported, be closed in. I'm a big fan of meditating with a blanket burrito. Wrap that blanket around, literally swaddle yourself. Big fan of swaddling. Big fan of weighted blankets. You can practice with your favorite hoodie. I do that a lot. I throw it up. I wear it when I'm not really feeling myself and I have to go out into the world today. I can throw that hoodie up and it offers me a sense of protection because, again, I'm swaddling myself. I feel more protected. You can practice with an emotional support pet, which is who I have in my lap right now. She often climbs up and practices with me. And when I notice that I get lost in thoughts or lost in emotions, I can literally feel her breathing on me. It helps me know that I'm right here and that I have somebody right here with me that loves me. You can practice with an emotional support plant or a whole art altar of guides and ancestors. You can practice with nature. I'm a big fan of that too. Being able to be outside and feel the breeze on your skin, feeling the sunlight, being totally alone on a beautiful hike on the top of a mountain and nowhere near humans, that could work for a lot of people. Works for me. Or you can practice by not sitting at all. You can practice by walking. You can practice by standing. You can practice laying down. You can practice with mindful movement. So many variations to add on to our practice to be regenerative. So when I say anchor, I really just mean a resource that can be there for you when it's extra hard. That can be there for you when you are ready to investigate your own growth edges. So you're in charge of that. When you're ready to explore the healing that is available on the other side of the feeling, the sense tone, the emotion, the thought of what you're avoiding. It doesn't happen overnight. It does happen bit by bit. And it happens with support. And it happens in community. You have guides that are trained to be there with you. It happens in connection with others who have been there too, even if their definition of there is different. Survivor-led healing is the future of healing because survivors don't push, we hold space. Trauma-sensitive mindfulness doesn't get rid of, excuse, or bypass experiences. It's a practice of cultivating an awareness that we can be right here and right now. We can have support. We can do hard things. We can have self-love. We can have connection to source, all at the same time. Because knowing that mindfulness meditation And opening our perspective to all of this is a both and practice. It's cultivating this awareness of choice, of choosing ourselves, choosing self-love. Conscious practice over and over and over again. Till that path to Oz, and thus our ticket back home, becomes clearer and clearer each time we practice it. The path to Mordor is still going to exist. You're still going to be able to see it at the crossroads there. But our perspective, the entirety of the experience is wider. We can better navigate the forest for the trees, the poppies for the pitfalls. Reconnecting our agency to respond rather than being at default to react. And I'm going to finish in closing with 2 quotes. First is from Kara Page, who is a Black queer healer and activist, and the director of the Audre Lorde Project. She says, being able to transform inside of perhaps the worst conditions, but still on a cellular level, being able to respond, to intervene, or transform what has been done to or on us. To remember that we deserve dignity, honor, and a way to look at how we can sustain our well-being in a society that has almost normalized our physical, emotional, and spiritual degradation. That, in and of itself, is collective resilience. And the second quote is from Larry Yang, who is the author of Awakening Together, which is another fabulous book. It's very shiny on the screen that I'm going to include on the notes. He says, the Dharma provided such succinct instructions, guidance, and invitations to different forms of practice. Its path is incremental, cumulative, and ultimately transformative. But we do not and need not change all at once. I've so appreciated that in the Buddhist tradition, we are not expected to simply magically turn into the spiritual ideal of loving kindness and compassion. What we are given instead are innumerable opportunities to practice being those ideals by trying them out, experimenting with them, and seeing what works in the reality of our own lives. Thank you very much for hanging out with me today and being here for this lengthy discussion. I've got a lot to talk about trauma-sensitive mindfulness. You can probably tell it's a topic that is very important to me because I don't know that I would be here today without it. And if there's one thing that I know about this practice is that I don't own it. It's gifted. It is a gift. It is a gift to anyone that is willing to try it out themselves. And that's why I am doing this. That's why I'm going forward this way, because I don't want to continue to hurt more than I can help. I would rather be able to try to help more. Hurt is still going to be there, but how can I figure out ways to support? How can I figure out ways to cope? That's why I do this. Thank you, friends. I'm going to leave the space open for questions. Thank you. Important definitions and language on the chat. Thank you. Language is important. We talk about it. We normalize it. I did not have this language when I was going through what I was going through. I can only imagine what the world would be like if we were able to teach this to kids. And that, again, is also some of my direction that I am consciously choosing to go to. I don't want to pass this on. How do we ground this out? Like, if we think of trauma like an electrical force, it comes in and it zaps us away from ourselves. So how do we figure out practices that ground that out so that we don't pass along that shock? That's what mindfulness meditation is for me. I'm going to leave a couple more moments for questions. If anybody has anything that they would like to drop in the chat, I just appreciate the heck out of you being here and staying with us and listening. This is a heavy subject, and in talking about it, it helps normalize it and it helps us process it. We can't do anything about anything that we're not willing to look at and talk about. So the more that we have places to do that, and the more that we have support to do that, and communities to do that, the more that we're able to transform it. All right, friends, thank you so very much. Again, I start teaching my first mindfulness course next Tuesday night on June 7th. Still open for registration. I do have sliding scale accessible options for folks there. And you can find my website at deannadanger.com mindfulness. My email is on there if you want to reach me for questions, and I am always willing to talk about this. Once I think I get past June, I'll probably go back to sending more actual blogs out because I want to make sure that I'm sending good information into the world to help engage folks in that way. And yeah, my classes are virtual, so you can join from anywhere. I'm also very actively figuring out a grounded brick and mortar place here in St. Louis to be able to do that, because there's one thing that I know about mindfulness and co-regulating nervous systems. We do a lot when we're able to do that in person. And this pandemic has been very hard in so many different ways. And it's also been really beneficial in some ways of helping us see into the corners and be able to have these kinds of virtual tools so that we have more accessible options for everybody. Thank you so much, friends. I appreciate you being here. And I look forward to talking with you more and engaging with you. And I wish you all the wellness, and I wish you all to find stability and ease in the midst of all that unfolds around and through you. Have a good night, friends. I can never get my mouse back. Bye, y'all.